Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. On behalf of the High Commission of India in Singapore and its partners at today's event, the Institute of South Asian Studies Singapore, the CII IBF Singapore, the Singapore Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, and the ICAI Singapore chapter, we extend a very warm welcome to all of you who are able to join in today evening's conversation with the Honourable Minister for External Affairs, Mr. Salman Khurshid. Without further ado, I would now like to invite Mr. Girija Pandey, the immediate past president of the CII IBF, to deliver the welcome note. Mr. Pandey.
His Excellency Mr. Salman Khurshid, Honourable Minister of External Affairs, Government of India, Her Excellency Mrs. Vijay Thakur Singh, High Commissioner of India to Singapore, Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, Chairman Institute of South Asian Studies, Mr. Narayan Mohan, Chairman SICCI, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first extend a warm welcome to our special guest who is here. He has just come in straight from the airport from Manila. And he is going to talk today on the economic imperatives of Indian foreign policy. So I think many of us who are business people here would find it very interesting to hear him on the economic imperatives of the foreign policy. Now, I think all of us are aware of the way Indian business has globalized. We are aware of all the issues that go with globalization. And whenever Indian business has stepped out either for investments or for exports, there is a need for a helping hand from the government. And I think foreign policy mandarins are increasingly getting involved in the business of Indian business. They're going out. And this is a global phenomena. Every country does that, and I think India has started doing that very well as well. If you look at just the simple thing of the Singapore-India story, the business story, started with the signing of the Comprehensive Economic Partnership. It's not that Indian business was not in Singapore before that. But since the CICA, and I was involved, I remember in 2005, in the CICA negotiations, we have seen a tripling of volumes, of number of Indian businessmen. Today, Indian companies are the largest in Singapore in terms of any other nationality. So I think here we have one of the excellent free trade agreement, a comprehensive agreement, which has driven business. And it was driven by foreign policy imperative of India, which was to look east. Singapore was obviously seen as the first post where this look east policy would be could be taken up. So we've seen that, and we've seen the benefits of this. When we formed in the CII, when we formed the India Business Forum, it was India Inc. which is here. Similarly, there is an India Business Forum in China, there is one in UK, US, which is working with the government many times on how to improve trade relations, how to look at some of the issues around, and this is where I think the foreign policy and the issues of Indian business. I recall that when I was building business for Tata Consultancy in China, the JV with the government, we had a huge amount of support from the embassy and the ambassador to help us open the markets for IT industry, which was closed at that time in 2001-2002 in China. And similarly, as many companies have noticed, as they look for bidding in tenders, as they look for setting up offices, as they look for taxes and all the entitlements under the various trade laws, it is very important that our foreign policy is aligned with the Indian economic goals of the Indian business. So I think we are going to hear much of that from the minister, And I would, before I pass on the mic to the Minister, let me just give some of you who don't know him a little bit of an introduction to Mr. Salman Khurshid, who's a renowned lawyer, educationist, writer, and a politician. He was born in a very distinguished family of educationists. I think many of us know that our President, Dr Zakir Hussain, was his grandfather, and his father, Khurshid Alam Khan, was also a noted parliamentarian and a minister in the Union Cabinet. Mr. Salman Khurshid has been in St. Stephen's College and then from Oxford. He has been an educationist, served in schools and Zakir Hussain Delhi College Trust. He has been in the Congress Party in UP, where he has been in the Congress chairman of the UP Congress Committee, and he has served as ministers in various capacities in the centre. He has been a Union Cabinet Minister of Law and Justice, and now from October 2012 he has been the External Affairs Minister for India. Many of you have probably met him in Singapore or heard him. He's widely known. He's also written books. That is a very interesting part of his personality. He has acclaimed play Son of Babar, which has been translated into several languages and performed in the country as well as UK. He's written At Home in India and In Winter Comes, better known books of Mr. Khurshid. So let me not stand between the Minister and you. May I invite the Minister for his address. Thank you.
Good afternoon to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. It's very encouraging to be invited for the second time to speak to a very distinguished audience of people interested in India-Singapore relations, particularly with a focus on economics. I have a prepared text, but this is a conversation, so I'll try and convert that into a conversation. I think we know each other well enough, India and Singapore, to be able to have a frank and free-wheeling conversation, exchange ideas, because we do come to Singapore from India with intent to gather, to discover, to learn some remarkable things that have happened in your history of growth and development. And of course we know that the size of our two countries is vastly different. And we could really have thousands of Singapores in our country. And if we did, you would have something to be worried about. We have thousands of Singapores. But Singapore is an inspiration. And Singapore is a very important partner. And Singapore is a very critical segment of India's Look East policy, which is now nearing 20 years. And of course, Singapore is a very important element of our engagement with ASEAN. I'm absolutely delighted that we have here, I have the opportunity to meet once again Ambassador Gopinath Pillai. I'm absolutely honored that Girija Pandey was here to introduce me, and then of course Mr. Rai Mohan, our own High Commissioner, Mr. Vijay Thakur Das, some friends that I have met before, and some very distinguished ladies and gentlemen who are here. If I was to describe to you what Singapore means to me, is that in the lexicon of modern day politics in our country, irrespective of political positions that we may take in domestic politics, there is an aspiration to be able to emulate the efficiency, the effectiveness, and the vision that has translated itself to this remarkable success story of Singapore. And I tell you, my first experience with Singapore was as a Deputy Minister of Commerce. I was number 2 to then Minister of State, independent charge of Commerce, and that was Mr. Chidambaram, who you know quite well since then. And I sat with the then Secretary of Commerce, who's now presently again very well known to you, the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, Montague Singh Ahluwalia. And we sat across the table with a delegation from Singapore, distinguished ministers, and several times when a point was made, somebody would pass a little slip to me and say, well, you can, for the present, give that answer. And generally the slip would say that the government is seriously looking at this issue and we intend to take a view. And after I had done that 3 times, Montague gave me a slip, and that said, if you carry on doing this, they're going to get up and say, well, where is the government? We've come a long way since then. That was the point at which we were opening up to the world. There was a paradigm shift. Our present Prime Minister was then Finance Minister. Between him and Mr. Chidambaram, the blueprint that I understand was left to them by the late Prime Minister, Shri Gandhi, was being implemented. And there was a tremendous sense of excitement in government. People were suddenly beginning to drop shackles that we had suffered for a long time. But as we look back, we explained to our interlocutors, as we did to our own people in the country, that we didn't really see them necessarily as burdensome shackles, but we saw them in a sense as what you would call as speed regulators, that it was important for India as it strove to become a modern and successful and stable country, and a successful democracy. It was important that there were elements in our economic landscape that required attention, but required attention through regulation. Perhaps the word regulation was not commonly used then, the word control was used, and maybe it was more like controls than regulation. But it was important to absent ourselves from felicity for a while, as Hamlet would say, because it was important that we allowed people to come together and reduce the distance between, the difference between the rich and the poor, the successful and the aspirational class. The class that was fed on dreams that were laid out for them by none other than Jawaharlal Nehru, our first Prime Minister, who talked of remarkable transformation of our society from an agrarian or rural backward society to something essentially modern. And in that process, he spoke of a new vision where the modern temples he described for India would be the factories and the huge dams that would give energy to a society stirring for change. But as I said, it was important for us to provide the checks and balances because we were a huge country. We needed inclusion, participation, and we needed to address disparity, and we needed to address the new class, emergent class, that wanted to participate in the growth story and in the benefits that we were able to deliver. But the benefits came largely through a decision made by government at the highest level as to what was fair inclusion, what was to be given at what level to whom. And as a result, we ended up with a more equitable society, but we also ended up being a very dependent society. People began to look upon government as a provider in the narrow sense that they believed that the entire responsibility for enterprise was for the government, which in turn would provide to them on controlled rates or free, or perhaps as they wished and they demanded. And I think a major breakaway from that was necessary, which we did 25 years ago under the leadership of the then Prime Minister, Mr. Narasimha Rao, and the then Finance Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. From there to now, we've had a long journey. And why am I saying this? I'm saying this because economic imperatives is the topic of the day. Economic imperatives as being the basis of foreign policy. We had a foreign policy at that time which focused on equity. A foreign policy that focused on dignity, equity, human rights, and emancipation of all human beings from subjugation by dominant forces, either economic, social, or political. And that foreign policy was described as a foreign policy based on a national consensus that was derived from our national movement, led by Mahatma Gandhi. The implements of that foreign policy and the description of that foreign policy as the punch-shield principles of foreign policy were actually derived from the philosophy of our independence movement. And I think if anyone knows about this, the content of our independence movement, the intellectual content of our independence movement, it is Singapore, because Singapore saw the interplay of two important forces that aspired for independence of our country: those who felt it was necessary to pick up weapons, arms, to get freedom, and those who felt that arms was not an option, that no matter what the provocation, how distressful the treatment that they deserved, it was the power of truth and non-violence that would prevail. And you know the story, at the end of the day, it was the power of truth and non-violence that succeeded. But as we changed in the 90s, we changed into a new economic paradigm for our country, and shifted the mix of a mixed economy. We never were a state-controlled economy, and we never have become, and perhaps never will in the near future, become a completely free market economy. We were a mixed economy, and we were happy to describe ourselves as a mixed economy. But that mixed economy was partly our own determination and our own ability to monitor it, but also largely dependent upon our special relationship that we had with Eastern Europe and with the Soviet Union. Much of our need of trade and fuel supply came on an arrangement in which we didn't need hard currency, we didn't need to pay in dollars, but it was an arrangement, broadly speaking, of a barter system that allowed us through that period. And of course, who can take credit for is for historians to discover. But when we changed, we didn't change alone. The coincidence of our mix of the economy and our close relationship with the Soviet Union also had another coincidence of our changing into another mode, a paradigm shift into a different economic mix, but at the same time the collapse of the Soviet Union, the birth of new nations in our extended neighborhood, and of course the end of the barter trade and the end of rupee trade in the markets of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. So the challenge was for us to check out whether we were then strong enough to stand on our feet, to to compete in the marketplace of the world, and to offer something to the world in order to engage its attention. And that's when we began, as it were, the outreach to the world. And obviously it impacted our foreign policy. It couldn't but impact our foreign policy, but the important thing is that we didn't allow our foreign policy to drift away from the fundamental principles that we believed in, that we cherished, and that were the basis of the large national consensus. And I think I would not be contradicted by my worst critics in saying that the consensus that was created at the time of independence is a consensus on foreign policy that continues to this day. No matter what our political debates, for one reason or another, might project, but the fundamental consensus remains the same. There are, on the edges, there's been some fine-tuning, some changes have happened, but the fundamental consensus remains the same. But within the broad fundamental consensus, which means what? Which means we are still very strong strategic partners of the Russian Federation. We have employed in our Connect Central Asian policy the important historical imperatives and historical connectivities that were available to us with that part of the Soviet Union. Now, as independent states, reaching out to us, emphasizing our historical links, emphasizing our regional links, and looking at commonalities of being able to work together. But in the years to come, a very important element of that will be our energy security, that we will be able to see one day the Tapi pipeline to begin with, perhaps many more will come, but the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline bringing gas from Central Asia into India, where our industry is hungry for energy. There are alternatives, but this seems today, despite the fact that we have issues with Pakistan, despite the fact that there's still some uncertainty about how quickly Afghanistan will settle into a stable democratic future after 2014, we have confidence and we have faith in Afghanistan weathering the storm. We have a commitment to Afghanistan. We have no exit policy for Afghanistan. We believe that Afghanistan will be and must be a great hub between South Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Central Asia. And of course, beyond from there, beyond into Eurasia and into Europe. And so what does it do? It combines our commitment of the past as traditional friends of Afghanistan, our commitment to Afghanistan as part of our extended neighborhood, but also as part of the larger economic landscape that we see for ourselves between India and Central Asia. And when we look at Central Asia, we don't look at Central Asia for ourselves alone. We look for Central Asia also as we look to ourselves, India, as a passage for all of the Indian Ocean, and indeed all of the IRAC members, all the way to ASEAN and Australia into Central Asia. We do hope that India will thus become a very important passage to Central Asia. A passage to India will become a passage to Central Asia. We then, of course, have a look-east policy that's been mentioned, a very important part of our foreign policy. A look-east policy, again, historical links. Historical links apparent here in all the ASEAN countries, apparent as far as Philippines from where I've just come. But that look-east policy now translating itself into a new dimension of economic interdependence. You need markets, we need technology and investment. And I think that plays well today. Of course, when we talk about investment, it isn't investment only one way. India today, as a stable, major, emerging economy, cannot just expect investments to come home and not invest in other countries as well. So we are very happy to invest across the globe, particularly in this part of the world, in Singapore, and I think therefore our investment profile here is well known to you, whether it's in the area of finance and banking, in the area of manufacturer services, in the area of trade, goods, and supply of essentials to Singapore. We remain hugely committed. But as you can see, two separate levels. One level that appeals more intuitively and immediately to ordinary people, citizens of one country combining and connecting with citizens of another country, trying to weave together a fabric of global citizens. But above that, or below that, depending on your perception, is a layer of economic connectivity. After all, what does a human being really aspire to do in life? What is the dream of a person? Is to live a life with dignity, to give his or her children a better life than they have led, open up opportunities for families and their children. And when that as an aggregate comes as an option or aspiration of people of a country, that becomes a part of the public policy of that country. And I hope that India is able to respond to this aspiration of people in Singapore who are happy with what they have achieved. You are truly a happy country. Perhaps haven't reached the level where you look at happiness quotients like our neighbor Bhutan does. But I see no reason why you shouldn't. From intellect quotient to growth rates to GDPs, and why not happiness? And I think if anyone can believe that happiness is an important part of your national outlook, I believe Singapore is one such country that can aim to do that. So as we look at Singapore in this multidimensional manner, what do we have? We have the significant figures, and I don't need to dwell on those figures for too long. The FDI in the last fiscal was around 14 billion US dollars. In the first quarter of the current fiscal year, FDI grew by 20% into India to 7.1 billion US dollars, of which Singapore contributed 2.2 billion. Our requirement is in the order of 1 trillion US dollars in infrastructure sectors like power, ports, roads, railways, airports, water supply, sewage treatment, sanitation, etc. in the next 5 years. And that's only with 1 or 2 small mini Singapore cities in our country, which we are aspiring. I said, why not think of 1,000 countries, 1,000 Singapores in India. I want to say very clearly and categorically, because sometimes there are doubts about, is there a plateau? Is there a plateau in our relationship between ASEAN and India, between Singapore and India? Is there a fatigue, reform fatigue, if you like, in India? And the answer is no. The government is committed to reform, to revive domestic investments, curtail fiscal deficit, and attract foreign funds. So, therefore, we've taken initiatives to promote FDI, which includes through measures such as increase in FDI in the telecom sector to 74%, and in insurance and aviation sectors to 49%, respectively. And I do believe that in the near future there will be joint ventures from Singapore flying into India. We've also liberalized the FDI policies in single brand retail trading, in publishing, in real estate, in asset reconstruction firms, and of course, most of all, what you want to hear is that we have taken steps to fast-track clearances of large infrastructure projects. We do realize that we have difficulties, and I do want to explain to you what our difficulties have been. But now we have a committee, a cabinet committee headed by the Prime Minister, that all of us, whichever ministry is involved in dragging our feet, have to appear before that committee and ensure that clearances are done there and then. I mentioned the telecom sector, and I think telecom sector is a sector which I must now dwell upon to explain to you why there was a slowdown in India. The slowdown in India happened because we moved very fast. I said to you earlier that when we were afraid to move fast in the early years of independence, it was because of our perception and understanding that if we move fast, a lot of people will be left behind, and that would lead to social unrest. We now in another phase of moving fast, and we moved very fast in the telecom sector. We outstripped landlines in a matter of months. And our idea of the telecom sector was that it is not money that we need, that the government doesn't need revenues as much as it needs penetration, because the penetration in due course would institutionalize into revenue. But more than that, penetration in the telecom sector would give us a vast new opening to implement many of the projects that we are now today handling. Whether it's in the financial sector, it's in the health sector, it's in a variety of outreach programs that would not have been efficiently possible but for the telecom sector growing exponentially. Unfortunately, having moved very fast, we found that there were many institutions that were still gravitationally being pulled back in time, and our Supreme Court was one such institution. Our Supreme Court has done some remarkable work over the years since independence. It has done the most creative jurisprudential work in the world. It has virtually rewritten the constitution of our country in a wholesome and beneficial manner, starting with the bland words of equality or the bland words of liberty. They have created remarkable jurisprudence that allows all kinds of interesting things to happen and protect the citizen far beyond anybody could have ever imagined. Of course, there will be scholars who will disagree about the extent to which an unelected body can intervene and interfere in public policy, something that the court itself is conscious of and continues to remind itself repeatedly that it cannot interfere in some parts of policy making, but will be able to interfere only those parts that are concerned with specific constitutional provisions, such as the provision of non-discrimination, equality, and so on and so forth. My belief is that the economics of the telecom sector was not fully understood by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court understood the traditional arguments of law, but there are non-traditional arguments now that judges have to face more and more. And I do believe that your courts are trying to handle them. Many of our courts are trying to handle them. The American Supreme Court has always adhered to something called the economic analysis of law. And I have been advocating with judges in our country that it is important for judges not just to be amateur sociologists, but they have to become professional economists as well. It's very important that the structure of our courts responds to the demands of our time. Litigation, conflict resolution today is far different from the times when the courts were handling only issues of property, such as huge landed property that was in the hands of a few people, and it was the desire of government and the duty of government to ensure that there was distribution of wealth, including property. And those were the early years when the Supreme Court creatively tried to balance what is called individual rights against the rights of society. But now again, I think a new challenge has come to the Supreme Court, and that challenge is to understand modern economy. Now, if Jagdish Bhargavati and Amartya Sen cannot agree, it is difficult for two lawyers in the Supreme Court to be able to get the judges to agree. So we need to find new instruments, new systems, perhaps new structures by which we can feed to the judges what is fundamentally essential to decide what is economically appropriate, right, and good for society. Of course, there's a lot of material on welfare economics, for instance, and a lot of material on monetary policies, and a lot of material on economic structures. But this is only something that I am giving to you as an explanation of why, in some areas of law, we got a drag. We got a drag because we moved very fast, and the institutions hadn't developed the capacity to move as fast as we did. Natural resources followed from spectrum arguments, and therefore the issue of what to do with natural resources. We had issues about water, we had issues about coal, we had issues about minerals, we had issues about forest wealth, etc. But I think that what is happening now is that we are beginning to address all those issues through modern legislation that provides enough flexibility, but at the same time, the same kind of balance that we believe is important to keep the body and soul of a society together, and not have some people question it. So while this is one issue that we've addressed, the important thing, of course, now is and I'm sure for those who are serious about trade with India, is that the current account deficit that we are committed to bringing down to 2.5%, today stands at 4.9%. And let me explain to you again why that has happened. It was a difficult choice. When the world was slowing down, when Indian exports were dropping as they were for anywhere else in the world, we had faith in the fundamentals of our economy, and we felt that if we provided stimulus packages, we would see through the country through that difficult period. And that time, our present president was the finance minister. 3 packages, stimulus packages, were given. It led to a huge runaway inflation, particularly inflation in food items. And that was unacceptable. We think that inflation beyond 4 to 5% is unacceptable for a country like India. We were hitting a ceiling of 22%, 23% food inflation. And so there had to be a squeeze on money supply. And the squeeze on money supply has its own detrimental impact on manufacturing, on investment. And therefore, suddenly, the 7 and 8% growth rate began to drop. And it dropped to 5%. But we are confident that we weathered the storm, and this 5% will go back to 7 and 8% in the next 2 years. That's the important thing. And we will have, because our fundamentals are strong, we will be able to bring down the current account deficit to 2.5%. We did go through a little turbulence as far as the rupee is concerned. We do believe, honestly believe, that 68 was nowhere near what the real value of rupee is. Perhaps 58 to 61 is the range of the real value of the rupee, and beyond that was entirely speculation. But look at how quickly, 2 weeks, and we are back to 61. So I think we've taken care of the worst period, and we can now start looking at what to do with investment. Our saving rates have remained high, above 30%. Now what we need to do is to stimulate internal investment and, of course, foreign direct investment into India. One important thing for those who know markets and read markets, even when things were looking grim for India, from our point of view, I think we were, to the Europeans, not looking too bad. People who had 0% growth, 1% growth, were saying to me, you should be laughing to the bank at 5% growth. 5% growth is not a small thing for countries that were actually facing a recession. But an important thing, it's a small cameo of an information. While we were going through that tough period, the sales in rural India of two-wheelers, was skyrocketing. And why was that happening? Because we have empowered rural India, and that is the massive market of tomorrow. We've empowered rural India with enormous shift of terms of trade from urban to rural. Enormous amount of infrastructure investment, ensuring that over the next 5 years, all the villages of our country will be provided electricity, at least linkage with electricity. We still have a major effort to ensure that there is enough electric power available to charge every village and to provide every village with power as they need, and then of course to have enough for our industry as well. So if I might just go back briefly to our relationship with the ASEAN, we are very, very pleased that we have a strategic partnership. We celebrated the commemorative summit in New Delhi in December 2012. The theme was ASEAN-India Partnership for Peace and Shared Prosperity, which is what we focus with you as in terms of a theme. We are looking at the large picture. We are looking at ASEAN's centrality as the driving force for economic and security structures in the entire Southeast Asian region. We support the vision of ASEAN Community for 2015, and we contribute to that initiative for ASEAN integration and the ASEAN Master Plan of Connectivity by ensuring that not into a distant future there will be seamless road travel between this part of ASEAN and India. So the roads can begin anywhere in Vietnam and go right through via Myanmar into India, and therefore we are looking at the eastern part, northeast part of India as a place that should beckon business from Singapore to provide connectivity, have free sky advantage of any number of flights coming in, bringing people, bringing in investment, and exploring possibilities in an area that still is open for enormous new ideas. I think that this is about as much as I would want to say about ASEAN. I could go on for much longer. I've told you about Central Asia, and I want to tell you a little bit more about our engagement of Africa and beyond. We are committed to Africa, and it's important here that I bring into this perspective our engagement of China. China is also a strategic partner of India, but China does have issues with India. We have issues with China, but the good news is that we have learned, China and India have learned, and found it necessary, important, and essential to ring-fence differences of perception, particularly as far as the border areas are concerned, and to engage in a productive manner, without any reservation, in the fields where we have a potential for mutual growth and connectivity. And that's in the area of trade, that's in the area of investment. Our Prime Minister is in China, and he has, I think, inked a very important further agreement for tranquility on the border with China. And I think that if there is an example of far-sightedness, maturity, patience and understanding with which two countries have civilizationally dealt with each other, it is in this ring fencing of the difficult areas. But we see China both as a partner and we see China as competition. And I think that's a good thing. Competition is a good thing in the marketplace. It's a bad thing not to have competition at all. And therefore, be it Africa, be it Europe, be it Southeast Asia, we are there, but we are I think, two different models. We present two different models of partnership, of business, of commercial interface, and that's a good thing, is that on a menu you have, for some things, perhaps a better proposition from China, for some things a better proposition from India. But for the Asian reality to manifest itself truly, it is important that India and China work together. And we look forward to being able to do that in the years to come. And surely, some of the platforms and areas and landscapes in which we will engage with each other are areas such as ASEAN and areas such as Africa. ASEAN, of course, has many other levels. We have the engagement in ASEAN. We have also the engagement with this region in BIMSTEC. We have engagement in this region in the Mekong-Ganga collaboration and cooperation. And therefore, we can see that there is a lot that is going to happen over the years to come. Now, we invite you. We invite you from ASEAN and from Singapore to look at critical areas of interest which are beneficial to both sides. The Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. Singapore is already engaged, but can be engaged in a much greater way by developing its own industrial zones along the DMIC corridor. Something like virtual cities, the Singapores, the little Singapores that I talked about. We can get that on the DMIC, we can get that in the Chennai, Bangalore Industrial Corridor, we can get it on the Buddhist circuit, and as I said, on the Northeast. And I think this is the important message that I would give here to people who are committed to a relationship between Singapore and ourselves. There is an important relationship that I must talk about, and that's the relationship with the United States of America. We had drifted apart from the United States of America for obvious reasons. The NAM movement, the inability of American foreign policy scholars and advisors to see the idea of an autonomous foreign policy as being acceptable to them. Not hostile, simply autonomous. But we had major concerns that kept us away from the United States. In fact, made us drift, but that didn't mean that we didn't have a relationship with them. Even when we were estranged or known as estranged democracies, described as estranged democracies, we had enormous amount of intellectual talent moving both ways. We still had enormous amount of trade and investment moving both ways. But an enormous new chapter was written when the 123 Civil Nuclear Agreement was signed between India and the United States of America. And I acknowledge that as a very important, far-reaching, and I believe a very courageous step that was taken by President Bush to change the entire landscape, not just for our two countries, but indeed for the whole world. I do believe that the world will never be the same place after this enormous breakthrough that President Bush successfully managed with our Prime Minister in the signing of this important agreement. Today, we look forward to working with the United States of America as friends and partners, not as allies, as friends and partners in a vast number of fields. Those fields include even in the areas where we have differences. There are differences. There are differences in climate change, there are differences in WTO, there are differences in issues such as food security, carve-outs, and so on. But the important thing is that we are able to talk to them as friends. That we are able to say to them that this is not because we don't find your perceptions acceptable, but it's only because we need to continue addressing concerns of our own society. We are here in the G20. We are in the marketplace of the world. We want a free exchange of ideas. We've opened up all shutters and we are letting winds blow through our country. But it's important at the end of the day that the very important landmarks that we remember from our history, which is ensure that whatever we do is felt as a positive step for the vast population of our country. We have a bludgeoning middle class, a growing middle class. This is our strength, but this is also an enormous responsibility. And this is no time to talk about the challenges of dealing with a growing middle class. They are great political challenges. They are great challenges of democratic institutions. But this is also our strength. And I do believe the ballast and the strength that the Indian economy has, the Indian political economy has, comes from this remarkable middle class. But into this middle class, we want to connect those who may feel deprived or disenchanted. And that's where, despite our commitment to opening up market opportunity, we have ensured that we don't let go of the social sector commitments that we have. India today has the largest and the most ambitious food security system under a new law, the food security law. We have today the largest and most ambitious free education program that we give to children from the ages of 6 and 14 in every part of our country, with midday meals to go with free education. We have today a very ambitious health program, swipe card health program for people living below the poverty line, and we have a very ambitious housing program for people living below the poverty line. The challenge in the years to come will be the challenge of the bell curve, the people in the middle classes. As their aspirations grow, their dreams become greater, and therefore their expectations become a major challenge for us. And I hope that in that process, Singapore and ASEAN and many other friends from across the globe will join India, not only in celebrating the success of our democracy, but also in strengthening and consolidating our economy. Thank you very much.